Hello and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be doing a director review of Spike Lee. So we're going to be covering the first 6, technically 7, of his movies, starting off right now with She's Gotta Have It. Beautiful Nola Darling can't decide what kind of man she wants to date, so she decides to date 3 at the same time. The first is Greer Childs, a rich, handsome narcissist. Then there's Jamie Overstreet, a stable, overprotective alpha male. Finally, there's Mars Blackman, a timid geek with a heart of gold. Unfortunately, while each suitor has his virtues, Darling just can't seem to make up her mind. I found that the male characters were accurately written with multiple levels of toxic behavior, Jamie being the least toxic, although he still is toxic. Jamie's most toxic moment is when he rapes Nola. It's the one moment Spike Lee mentioned in a 2014 interview that he would redo if he had the chance, saying, "I was immature and I hate that I did not view rape as the vile act that it is." He's also somewhat toxic in how he treats Nola's lesbian friend, but it's kind of understandable since many other people would act the same way if someone was hitting on their partner. This movie felt like it was made in the 1940s or the 1950s, specifically because of the black and white aesthetic. The only thing that ensures you know that it wasn't is its progressive messaging of female sexuality and sexual orientation. I felt the dialogue was from a student film, and the sex scenes were over the top. I also felt that Spike Lee's acting left a lot to be desired. Luckily, he improved by the time he made Do the Right Thing. Overall, it's an okay feature film debut. Let's move on now to his next film, School Daze. At historically black Mission College, the activist-minded Dap immerses himself in a world of political rhetoric and social movements. One day he hopes to rally the students as a united front. At the other end of the spectrum, Julian, the head of the biggest fraternity on campus, is more concerned with maintaining a strict social order. In between, Dap's conflicted cousin, Half Pint, spends most of his time rushing the fraternity. This is a college film with a little bit of musical mixed in there. While watching it, I thought that it's probably like Animal House mixed with Hairspray or West Side Story, especially with the division between light-skinned and dark-skinned black people. The acting was okay, although many of the characters seem underdeveloped and thin. There also didn't seem to be much of a plot, making it hard for me to connect with it. That was a short review, but we're going to be moving on now to Mo Better Blues. I'm specifically skipping over the next film in that, which would have been Do the Right Thing, because I have seen it previously. I didn't do it in this watch through, but I will touch on it in the ranking at the end of this video, so stay tuned for that. Financially irresponsible giant manages a jazz group, but his sax player, Shadow, wants to replace him with a better businessman. Bleak, the band's trumpeter, then tries to defend his close pal Giant, leading to a power struggle between the two musicians. Meanwhile, as Bleak tries to straighten things out with his bandmates and manager, he also must choose to be with either sweet teacher Indigo or sultry singer Clark. As a friend of someone who is a little person, I did not appreciate how often they use the derogatory term midget to describe Spike Lee's character, Giant. Outside of my issue with that, I thought that the music was good, and Denzel Washington and Wesley Snipes were great as usual. Although some scenes could be cut for a tighter narrative, the story itself was more cohesive than the previous film that I talked about, School Daze. Another complaint I have is that some of the cinematography felt like a TV movie. Let's move on to the next film that I watched, Jungle Fever. A married black lawyer named Flipper begins an affair with Angie, his white secretary. When the news is leaked through an acquaintance, Flipper's wife kicks him out of the house. Flipper decides to begin courting his mistress, only to be greeted by disapproval from friends, family, and even strangers. The relationship continues to be strained in a society not ready to accept it, and people are hurt during its inception. So one of my earliest thoughts while watching this movie was that the score was a bit too noticeable and injected a whimsical tone to the movie that just didn't really work. The story was kind of overextended and could have delved deeper into how the black and white communities treat interracial relationships, especially at that time. While Spike Lee's goal was to underscore this movie with the topic of the crack epidemic, it felt kind of out of place and would have hit harder had it been its own film. I also had trouble connecting with Wesley Snipes' character and his decisions. The ending was also very unexpected and odd, so just that's a warning if you ever decide to check this one out. Now let's move on to the biggest film that he's done, one of the potential Oscar films that he's done as well, Malcolm X. A tribute to the controversial black activist and leader of the struggle for black liberation. He hit bottom during his imprisonment in the 50s. He became a black Muslim and then a leader in the Nation of Islam. His assassination in 1965 left a legacy of self-determination and racial pride. I felt that Spike Lee did a great job in telling the story of Malcolm X. He began with a great visual of the American flag burning into an X, which hooked the audience in quite quickly. The overall story is of a man's journey from his criminal past to becoming somewhat of a religious zealot with the Reverend Elijah Muhammad, and subsequently learning the errors of his ways and establishing a true identity for himself away from that group of people. Denzel Washington does a great job in portraying Malcolm X, although Kingsley Ben-Adir did a better job in One Night in Miami, in my opinion. The rest of the cast is also great in their roles, and the crew did a great job, especially the costuming and score. So let's move on to the final film I will be covering before the ranking, Crooklyn. As her teacher mother, Carolyn, and her jazz musician father, Woody, worry over monthly bills, grade schooler student, Troy Carmichael, banters and bonds with her 4 brothers. Against her will, Troy is sent to her aunt's southern home for a summer visit, but when she returns to her bustling Brooklyn neighborhood, she learns that a family member is gravely ill. Already mature, Troy is forced to face some very grown-up facts about life and loss. So I love the authentic family portrayals throughout this film, which makes sense since this is semi-autobiographical. It was just very, very relatable to me as somebody who has multiple siblings. Just the family dynamics between, each group, brothers and sisters and parents. While I enjoyed this movie quite a bit, I do have a few complaints. The distorted view for scenes in the South was distracting, although I do understand that it was intentional and an attempt to portray what the character are going through visually. I also wish they had delved deeper into Delroy Lindo and Alfre Woodard's characters, since I felt they were underdeveloped. In an early scene, I took issue with the racist and homophobic insults that were aimed at the character Tony Eyes. I understand he's not a likable character, but you don't have to put that in the movie. He was supposedly Chinese, yet portrayed by a straight white male, like Rob Schneider in I Now Pronounce You Chuck and Larry, literally exactly looks the same. I may have enjoyed it more had I grown up in that era or a similar type of neighborhood, but I found it very hard to relate to much other than the sibling relationship dynamics. Now, I might be going off on a bit of a tangent here, but I'm going to give you a little bit of information about myself. So I grew up in the 2000s. This film was more set in the 1970s. Very different eras, very different types of parenting style. And I also grew up in the suburbs, whereas this is more a film set in the city. So again, another point of disconnection. But I did grow up with, I do have 4 siblings, so I can sort of relate to that type of dynamics, although we were much larger spread out in terms of age gap. I felt as though a lot of the parenting, the children were getting away with quite a lot and weren't really supervised, which didn't really make sense to me just based on my own experiences. So that was something that I found difficult to work with. The fun fact about this film is that it was originally a pilot, a TV pilot for Nickelodeon, which meant that they would have longer time to tell this story and give the characters more development and impact when it comes to character relationships. And one of the things I should mention is that my parents weren't a huge fan of the shows I watched growing up. So like the shows on Nickelodeon and Disney. Specifically, I'm going to mention The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, because they felt as though, and iCarly, both TV shows, they don't really have the kids getting much consequences for their actions, although it does happen sometimes and a lot of the times. But I just understood it was fine because it's children's fantasy. Specifically with iCarly, it's a very different situation because they're teenagers, and yeah, they have a guardian who's a buffoon sometimes, but he could step up into that parental role when need be. And when you're dealing with teenagers, you go with a different approach than obviously when you're dealing with younger children who need to be taught right and wrong. Let's move on from my tangent to the ranking for this episode. Let's move on to my ranking for these films. So at number 7, we have School Daze, which I rated a 2 out of 5. Next, at number 6, we have Crooklyn at 2.5 out of 5. Then at number 5, we have Jungle Fever at 2.5 out of 5 as well. Then at number 4, we have Mo Better Blues at 3 out of 5. Then at number 3, we have She's Gotta Have It at 3 out of 5 as well. At number 2 is Malcolm X with 4 out of 5. And at number 1 is the movie I didn't do a full review of in this video, Do the Right Thing, at 5 out of 5. I really love this movie, and honestly, if you haven't seen it, go watch it. If you have seen it, you know how good it is. Like, please let people know how good it is. Again, thank you for watching. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any suggestions or information you'd like to share, please leave a comment down below. And if you'd like to see more from me, hit the subscribe button. Thank you again for watching, and stay tuned for part 2, which should be coming out next week.